First of all, thank you for being here. It's an honor, really. And I'll start with the really broad question.
Okay.
So what to you are the links between women's issues, social issues, and environmental issues?
Yeah. Social issues, women's issues, and environmental issues. You know, when I used to work at Sierra Club, there was it was founded in 1892 by a writer who was quite a prophet for wilderness named John Muir. And he had this saying that whenever you get hold of anything in the universe, you find it's hitched on to everything else. So to me, I mean, so women's issues are about justice, and also about, I think also women's issues are about caring for community. And environmental issues are about survival on the planet, but caring for the larger community, which is the non-human world. And social justice issues play into all of that as well, because if you have a community and you're caring about it, it's an environmental community, it's a social community, it's a resilient community. So if you have inequity, exploitation, injustice, it's not going to be a healthy community for women. It's not going to be healthy for the environment. And it certainly isn't going to create social justice or social cohesion. So improvements in one area, I believe, inevitably improve other areas. And the goals of a healthy, inclusive, sustainable, resilient community of humanity, that's a community of species that ultimately is a planetary home that's secure, meets the needs of all of those things. They're not in opposition. In other words, people talk about vicious cycles and virtuous circles. There's a certain virtuous circle that when you improve social justice, you're improving the status of women, you're likely also embracing policies that aren't disastrous for the environment.
I noticed how you brought up the fact of how all of these issues, they all pertain to a certain sense of community. Mm-hmm. This idea that when people work together and they each give their own diversified opinions, that they can come up with a much more viable solution that'll please all of their needs. Mm-hmm. So would you also say that in this sense we should always kind of propose these ideas when getting young student voters? I know we brought this up before, but it is very important to us, because what we're starting to find, and one of the reasons we love that group, Apathy is Boring, is because so many students now are apathetic towards political concerns. They see it farther off as some kind of abstract world where where the older, the more empowered will manipulate, or a small minority will rather manipulate the entirety of a country's comings and goings. And we really want them to feel much more related to politics. We want them to kind of understand how it affects them and the kind of influence that it can have over their life and the influence they can have over it. So we would personally just love to know, what is your particular stance in using these kinds of issues to increase voters showing up in the ridings? Yeah,
what I tend to do is, I mean, I had a speaking tour when Harper prorogued the last time, and I called it Rescuing Democracy from Politics, because people tend to think that the business of voting is about being interested in something called politics, and when politics is gross, they don't want to be involved in it, so you turn away. But when you think about democracy, and this is another problem, is our culture is quite permeated with consumer culture, and the idea that we exist to shop and we exist to be acquisitive, and we're not actually exploring our potential as human beings. We're consumers in an economy instead of citizens in a democracy. So I try to pay attention to the words we use. And if you're a citizen in a democracy, then you're a participant. It's not something out there that's happening to you or that you can choose to ignore. Because a democracy exists. Why is Canada a democracy? Well, in theory, a long, long time ago, we embraced the notion that as a community, we could take care of each other and do things that none of us could do for ourselves individually. So nobody imagines that they want to, say, be responsible, each person, to build the sidewalk in front of their home. We know that there's some things we have to do in common. We do them together. And I also have a very deep concern that the values of Canada as a country are being eroded, because we've always been a country that identified ourselves around our sense of the collective, our sense of all of us together, our compassion for community. So that's why we have a universal health care system, for example, and the U.S. has only now begun to deal with the problem of people not having health insurance. So back to your point about how these issues help young people to know that they are powerful in that system, I think it starts with saying that citizens, all of us, each citizen, regardless of age, has power, and that we are active participants and control what happens in democracy. So we have to take control of it and take it away, actually, from political parties. Because political parties, as you use the word manipulated, and there's no question about it, votes these days are manipulated by riding kind of Machiavellian planning to shift over. And also, by the way, and if young people don't know this, I really want to share this with people, there are legal tools that political parties use for what's called voter suppression. So young people need to know that not every party wants them to vote. In fact, some parties want you not to vote. And voter suppression that's legal includes attack ads, which make people disgusted with politics and more likely to stay home. Voter suppression that's legal makes the voting system more complicated. So you've heard of the it was called the Fair Elections Act, but then it got dubbed the Unfair Elections Act because it was really pretty unfair. But it quite deliberately makes it harder for certain groups of Canadians to vote. It'll make it harder for First Nations people to vote, it'll make it harder for homeless people to vote, and it will definitely make it harder for young people to vote. Yeah. So if your vote wasn't important, why do you think Stephen Harper's gone to so much trouble to make it harder for young people to vote? That's really clear evidence of your power. He does not want you voting.
Wow, yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
Well, on another tangent, completely. In your career as an activist and also as a politician, how have you seen Canadian environmental policy evolve, or did it evolve?
It was moving forward, sort of haltingly, 1 step forward, 2 steps back. In good years, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. We were always able, when I say we, the environmental movement, and I identified myself in a nonpartisan way. I wasn't a member of any political party, but I worked in the environmental movement. We were generally able to get any decision maker to move to what we wanted if we presented a strong case, lots of good evidence, and had a good communications campaign so that the majority of the public, or at least a significant number of the public, would contact that politician and say, we want you to do. So it always worked pretty well in democracy in Canada. Now, there's never before been a prime minister who actively hates the idea of environmental programs. I mean, I don't know why, but Stephen Harper has destroyed most of our environmental laws. I'm not just reformed them or tweaked them. I mean, a wrecking ball. It's serial acts of vandalism against the laws we used to have. Mm-hmm. So what I'd experienced was evolving, getting better and getting better. And then at the federal level, it's been a disaster the last 9 years. Now, provincially, there have been efforts made, good efforts on climate change from Ontario and British Columbia and Quebec. There's actions at the provincial levels. New Brunswick just banned fracking, which is great. Actually, the New Brunswick election was fought over fracking. The Conservative government of New Brunswick wanted fracking. The leader of the Green Party of New Brunswick, who's an old friend of mine, David Kuhn, defeated the sitting energy minister for the Conservatives. The ballot question was fracking. And the Liberals took government in New Brunswick because they promised that they wouldn't frack. This is big stuff in terms of the way things are moving at the provincial levels. Federally, we need to have that happen too.
Definitely. And we're also wanting to inquire more as to, because you bring this up before, and I noticed the fact that concerning like fracking and these different environmental issues that are so important to Canada, but Canada, as it seems, has been kind of delineating itself more and more from environmental issues, and is one of the only countries that is involved with the UNCCD, for example.
Yeah.
And we're not kind of seen on a global scale as being a major Western power, first and foremost, that takes environmental issues to a very large degree as an important part of the political life of our country.
Yeah, well, no, when I go to international climate meetings, and it's hard for Canadians because, you know, when you love your country and you go overseas and you go to a climate meeting and delegates from other countries say, why do people even bother coming? And I said, well, it's not my fault. I'm, you know, I'm leader of the Green Party. And I've actually had people say, I don't care. Just don't come.
Wow.
Yeah, Canada's getting detested. David Suzuki had this experience. He was in an elevator at a conference. He'd gone to be the babysitter for his daughter's kids because she was the speaker at the conference. And an African delegate got on the elevator, saw that he was from Canada, and said, why do you people even come to, you know, and he said, oh, you know, you may not know me, but my name is David Suzuki. I'm an environmentalist. I really am. They said, pfft. So it's going to take some rebuilding because it's not just that we haven't had good climate policies at home. And you mentioned that we've withdrawn from the UN Convention on Drought and Desertification. We also withdrew from Kyoto Protocol. So what Canadian delegations have been doing in these negotiations is sabotage. So it's not just that we're not pulling our own weight. We're monkey wrenching the efforts of others. We're going into rooms where they were close to agreement and saying, we don't agree to that, we don't agree to that. And you see, because the UN system works by consensus. So when a country says we're blocking, then we've stalled action. We used to, there's a former Minister of Foreign Affairs, Lloyd Axworthy, used to talk about Canada as punching above our weight. You know, we'd go to these international meetings. We were the good guy country, right? We'd punch above our weight. Well, disastrously for the world, when Canada goes into these meetings as the bad guy country, we're still punching above our weight. So we're dragging things down. The rest of the world, I went to the Lima negotiations in December, and I was telling everybody, don't worry, next election Harper's gone. Said, really? The rest of the world is just holding its breath for us to be back to being a good country. Can I tell you a crazy story? It's probably too long for this interview. No, please. All right. Well, it's a crazy story. To get into the negotiations, because Harper doesn't allow opposition party members of parliament on the Canadian delegations anymore. So in the negotiations that happened in Warsaw in December of 2013, I went with the government of Afghanistan. So I'm there as wearing an Afghanistan badge so I can get into all the meetings. And I'm taking notes for the government of Afghanistan, which meant I got to go into the back room where all the developing countries, well, it's not back room, it's a huge room. It's because it's the plenary room for a group called the G77 in China, which is a huge operation of the developing countries plus the rich, well, China, India, Brazil. It's a very interesting constellation of countries.
All-inclusive.
It is, and low-lying island states, least developed countries, and their meetings are always very off-limits to people from industrialized countries. So for me, this was an amazing window into the diplomacy of developing countries, and they were very cool. But in the context of being in the room there, weirdly, in the developing countries, Saudi Arabia is there too. So the Afghanistan minister, who was so pleased to have a person taking notes for him who was a Canadian member of parliament, took me over to meet a friend of his from Saudi Arabia. And the Saudi Arabian delegate said to me, well, he said, I'm on the verification group with the Kyoto Protocol. He said, I keep track of all the, you know, the documentation and validation of membership. And he said, I want you to know when Canada came to me to say that you were filing the notice to withdraw from Kyoto, I tried to talk them out of it. So I tried to explain to them there's no penalties, you should stay in Kyoto. So here I'm finding out a Saudi Arabian delegate tried to talk Canada into staying in Kyoto. And then I felt so sad, and I was saying to him, I'm so sorry, we tried, I know there was no reason for us to leave Kyoto, and I was feeling pretty emotional. And the Saudi Arabian delegate reached over, put his arm on me, and said, don't worry, we all know this isn't really Canada.
Oh, wow. That's beautiful.
Yeah, so I thought, well, the world is waiting for us. They're not giving up on us yet.
They can still see that people like you who are actively involved on these kinds of issues still want to maintain a good reputation.
Yeah, but I mean, it's people, Canadians, because also when Canada's media has also been ignoring climate, so there's never any Canadian reporters at these meetings. So Canadians don't know exactly how badly we're viewed by the rest of the world. And it's really hard if you're the person coming home and saying, well, they hate us. Yeah. That doesn't sound like you're a proud Canadian anymore. It's very hard to say to Canadian media, Harper's making us hated, because it sounds extreme. But that's what I experience when I'm in these meetings. So I know we can fix it, because they're holding out hope. The real Canada. Please stand up, real Canada. Yeah.
Oh, definitely. And also, just because I know we're trying to jump to a bunch of different topics, But we're also concerned with immigration and seeing how Canada is one of the most one of the most open as it stands right now to new immigrants seeking whether it be political asylum or they're seeking better economic opportunities. What are your views on the growing demographic of Canada in terms of cultural diversity?
It's excellent. The difficulty I see, and which is really interesting, I represent a riding that is not ethnically diverse. I represent an extremely dominant Caucasian riding with very little ethnic diversity, Saanich Gulf Islands. It's beautiful and fantastic, but I only mention this because as a member of Parliament, I spend about 90% of my time on immigration and refugee cases because the system has become so unfair, so arbitrary, the rules change all the time, and it's really hard to fight for people. So I spend, we obviously have some immigration, or I wouldn't be spending that much time working on it, but even simple things like a family that has been living in Canada for a long time and a member is, or somebody's getting married or somebody's sick and they need a relative to come, just permission to come visit family is routinely refused. It's a fight every time to get people to come. And then the other thing that what Stephen Harper's government has done is created this notion of we'll take rich people. Rich people can jump the queue. If you're willing to put a big investment in Canada, you can jump the queue. And I just recently came on a study that the millionaire immigrant category is actually 2 years out paying less in taxes than the refugee community.
Really?
Yes, they buy a property, they get their stake in Canada, but they're not actually here to earn money. They're not actually making a living here. It's an astonishing study that somebody who comes here as a refugee 2 years out is already paying more in taxes than someone who came in the millionaire category. So I'm a big believer in fairness in our immigration and refugee system, giving people a fair chance to immigrate with their families, and we're the only party that opposes the temporary foreign workers program, both because it skews our labor market and because it's exploitative of the workers. People who come here on a temporary foreign workers program are not allowed to leave their employment and find a different employer in Canada. You're basically stuck with the employer you've got, and if you've got a problem, you're back to your country. And you also generally are here by yourself, so you're separate from your family while you're sending your money home to them. I think it's extremely exploitative and unfair. And if we need more, if we don't have enough work, another thing is Canadian youth has twice the unemployment rate of the rest of the country. So Canada's unemployment rate is 7%. Youth unemployment is 14%. And yet we're told that we have to get temporary foreign workers to answer, to pour coffee at Tim Hortons. It's just craziness. So back to your question, immigration and refugee policies, we should be much more open to assisting people who need to get here for political asylum. And we should accept immigrants and their families as potential new Canadians who will be staying for good and not temporary foreign workers alone.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome. Thank you. Why should you vote? Only because it's democracy, only because it's your future, only because the people who are voting are old people who are not going to be around when all the troubles we're leaving for you hit you like a ton of bricks. Why should you vote? It's your future, and if you don't, nobody's going to save you but you. Why should you vote? Stephen Harper doesn't want you to. Check out the Fair Elections Act. It's a ton of new rules that make it harder for young people to vote. Vote because we need each other. Vote for Canada. Vote for yourself. Vote for your future.